Dear friends, I welcome you to this week's Sunday Reflection. This is the reflection of the 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year A. And the theme of our reflection is God's love is for everybody. As creatures created in the image and likeness of God, we are all involved in this everybody. Now let us see what the readings of today mean for us. In the first reading from the book of Prophet Isaiah, chapter 56, verse 1 and verse 6 to 7, we see a re-emphasis on the requirements for justice and righteousness which God has established from the beginning. And then in verse 6 of it, we see a set of criteria that qualifies foreigners to enjoy the love and blessings of God. Now, adherence to these criteria, verse 7 now enumerated two important rewards for these foreigners. First is that God is going to accompany these foreigners into the holy temple, Mount Zion, the Holy of Holies. Second is that while in this holy temple, God is going to make them joyful. Now let us make some analysis on the temple used. In the Jewish time, the temple was divided into several increasing holy areas which were restricted. The outermost part of the temple was restricted to foreigners, the Gentiles, and this outermost part is called the Gentiles' court. The next court is the court of the women. This court of women is restricted to Jewish women. The next part of the temple is the court of Israel. The court of Israel now is restricted to Jewish men only. And now the next court is the court of priests. The court of priests is restricted to Levites, priests, and some Jewish men. And then there again, there is the holy place where burnt offerings and sacrifices are made to God. And the last of the parts in the temple is the Holy of Holies. This Holy of Holies is restricted to high priests. Now, under normal circumstance, the Gentiles were not allowed to cross beyond the Gentiles' court. And now you can see God in this first reading promising to break boundaries, break barriers, and then cross these barriers, cross these foreigners into the court of priests, where they can freely make their sacrifices and burnt offerings to God. The temple, again, was a symbol of God's presence, encounter with God. And so it was not enough that God was going to accompany them, break barriers. God was also going to give them access to himself. Why? Because the temple was going to fade. The temple was going to fade because it is an earthly structure. But God himself, who is love, who gives everlasting love, will from generation unto generation give his people access to himself. Now, in the second reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, chapter 11, verse 13 to 15 and 29 to 32, we see St. Paul making efforts to bring back fallen Jews into the Christian fold. St. Paul says his major objective was to make these Jews envy what Christianity has to do. And so he says one of the surest ways of making people desire for Christianity is to make them see what Christianity can do. And so in the last verse of this chapter, it says, God has made us prisoners of disobedience that he may show mercy unto us. Now St. Paul explains this very well. no individual is by right worthy for the salvation of God. Then if the Jews had obediently observed the ordinances of God, they would have felt that the salvation, they earned it by right. And so St. Paul now says that God has involved these Jews into disobedience, that they may value the salvation of God as an act of God's mercy and not by merit. In the gospel reading of today, we see the encounter between Christ and the Canaanite woman from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 15 verse 21 to 28. Let us make some analysis of this encounter. For Christ, it was time for deliberate withdrawal, a time that he and his disciples could withdraw to prepare for the cross. But there was no such time in Palestine, and so Christ, as now looking for a quiet place for reflection, moved on to the north towards Galilee, and precisely to Tyre and Sidon. Now, Tyre and Sidon was a Phoenician part where non-Jews dwell, and so the Jews will not disturb Christ and his disciples. Now you could imagine this is a place where the Gentiles dwell, and so the Canaanites were arch enemies of the Jews. But notwithstanding that Christ was a Jew, this woman broke boundary, knowing what she wanted, moved towards Christ. And then on reaching towards Christ, she shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." It was as if Christ was silent over this call. And so the disciples moved towards him and said, "Oh, give this woman what she wants so that she will live, because she has turned to become a nuisance to us." The action of these disciples was not a show of compassion. Rather, they were making effort to get rid of this woman because she has disturbed them a lot. Now, Christ turned to them and said, "I am only meant to come to the lost sheep of the house of Israel and not the Gentiles." This never made the woman weak. Rather, she persisted and came close. Notwithstanding what Christ has said, she came close and said, "Lord, heal me. Heal my daughter." Christ turned to this woman and said, "Woman, but it is not fair to take what belongs to children and give it to dogs." But this woman, as a Greek, persisted and answered Christ, "Yes, it is not fair, but even the little dogs can eat from the scraps from their master." This overwhelmed Christ, and he said, "Woman, for this faith of yours, your request has been answered." Now, some scripture scholars now give two good important reasons why this woman persisted even after what seemed like insulting statements. Now, dogs were unclean scavengers, and so the Gentiles as foreigners were seen as dogs. So this statement looks like an insulting statement. So scripture scholars now say that though it looks insulting, but the tone with which Christ used in passing this message made it less insulting. Again, the diminutive word used for dog there was konaria. That is the Greek word. And konaria is a household dog instead of wild dogs. So this could form the reason why this woman moved towards answering Christ in a low tone, that even the little dogs could feed from the scraps from their masters. Dear friends, what are the lessons we need to go home with from the readings of today? The first lesson is that justice and righteousness can win us a wonderful place in the sight of God. We see how Christ promised faithful foreigners a wonderful place, an opportunity to break boundaries so as to enjoy the love of God. Secondly, in the action of the Canaanite woman, we find 4 important lessons. One is that this woman's action showed a great love. This woman turned the misery of her child into her own. The second is that she showed great faith, a faith that showed worship, a faith that turned requests into prayers, a faith that grew in contact with Christ. Again, this woman's action showed an action of persistence. In Luke chapter 18 verse 1, Christ tells his disciples, pray always and never lose heart. We are enjoined today to keep praying. Keep praying and keep asking God. Keep trusting and believing in God, for He will do that which we ask of Him. Again, this action showed this woman as having the gift of cheerfulness. This woman was cheerful, even when what looked like insulting statements. This woman was cheerful to have answered this question cheerfully. Again, most importantly, St. Paul warns his audience in the second reading of the attitude of contempt. Just because he was making effort to bring back these fallen Jews into the fold should not give the Gentiles an opportunity to be jealous. Jealousy can deny us the glory and the blessings and favors of God. And so, dear friends, let us pray to God that He will continue to grant us the grace to be faithful to Him. May the good Lord bless us.